Hi guys, it's Lucy. Today I wanted to talk about two books that I finished recently. The first one is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, and the second one is called Identity, The Demand for Dignity and the Politics of Resentment by Francis Fukuyama. Yes. So Cloud Atlas, I'm very late to this. This is a cult classic, and I wanted to talk about the movie after speaking about the book. Right off the bat, this is a dystopian fantasy story. It was published in 2004. There are six different stories that are covered within this one overlapping plot. So there are two stories that are set in the future, and then there are two that read like contemporary fiction, so modern days, and then two other plots set in historic times. So it sounds a little bit disjointed and it could be confusing, but David Mitchell does such a great job in the novel. So you start getting into the flow of things, maybe not from page one, obviously, and it's a little bit confusing when he starts switching stories, but by 100 pages I was fully invested and could kind of see where this was going. So the cool thing with dystopian fiction is that it sounds completely out there, but at the same time it is like a mirror reflecting back at us, taking some part of dysfunction in our current society, in current humanity, and exaggerating that and extrapolating that and making it something that is both jarring because of how true it is, but also cool because of how creative and out there it is. So the first way he does this is changing language. So for the four plots that are in the future and in the past, he changes the narrative voice completely and changes the language itself. So the word usage is very different. You feel this, you feel like you're being transported to foreign lands across times, and that is something that is very hard to do with just words. It's not, there's no benefit of costume, there's no benefit of any other kinds of visuals and backdrop to help with this. So the fact that he accomplishes so much imagery in one book is a feat in itself. And the truth that I wanted to point out that, people might not focus on too much, which when I read it, it was quite it was quite an epiphany kind of a moment, that something so true could be said in such a book, because I didn't expect it to reflect real life at all in any sense. But there's something profound about this in particular. So I'll just read this part. This is the most futuristic scenario, and the character says, "The old ones mastered 6 miles, seeds, and made miracles ordinary, but it didn't master one thing, a hunger in the hearts of humans, a hunger for more." "More what?" I asked. "Old ones got everything. Oh, more gear, more food, faster speeds, longer lives, easier lives, more power. But it weren't enough for that hunger, what made old ones rip out the skies and boil up the ocean and poison soil with crazed atoms and donkey about with rotted seeds, so new plagues was born and babies was freak birthed. And that human hunger birthed the civilized, but human hunger killed it too." That sounds to me like a combination of global warming plus nuclear warfare or nuclear contamination, to be honest. And something similar in another plot. "Science devises ever bloodier means of war until humanity's powers of destruction overcome our powers of creation, and our civilization drives itself to extinction. What a symphonic crescendo that'll be," which is very sarcastic and very dark. And another thing about aging and perhaps the stagnation as we reach middle life, not for everyone, but he says, "Middle age is flown, but it is attitude, not years. that condemns one to the ranks of the undead. In the domain of the young there dwells many an undead soul. They rush about so their inner putrefaction is concealed for a few decades. That is all. These are very profound words, and I didn't expect to find them in a fiction work, but this is what makes all great fiction really great. They transcend the characters themselves. They speak out to us about ourselves. This is the really mirror thing that only I think art could accomplish. In art in all forms, art with a capital A, if you believe in that. So the last thing that I would say about the book, and this relates to the very last line as well. When I read Underland by Robert McFarlane, I mentioned that there's a sense of powerlessness when it comes to things like global warming, the sad reality, and how do we combat that and slow that down. And I mentioned, for myself as an individual, I felt very powerless, and I felt I didn't know how to think about it even. So there's almost a sense of avoidance, not just sadness or an anxiety. But I think the answer came a couple weeks later when I read this book, some sort of an answer. It says, this is the very last two lines: your life amounted to no more than one drop in a limitless ocean. Yet what is any ocean but a multitude of drops? And I'll leave it there for the book. And when I watched the movie, and first of all, I'm a fan of everything that Tom Hanks does. So I thought it was a great movie, but only because I read the book. The movie is a bit more confusing and a little bit even more discombobulated than the book, having, divided itself into 6 different plots and ending each at half-point mark and then finishing off the second half in the reverse order. The movie cannot do this. The movie has to cut scenes and cut across plots more times because it's trying to piece together all the climaxes so that they all climax at around the same time, and then they all round off plot-wise at the same time. So that is a very huge challenge when it comes to timeline, which we think of as a chronological when it comes to the movie. So of all the things they cut, the 2 stories that were really well done were the 2 futuristic ones, I thought, and the one that was worse, that was unfortunate, that I felt didn't reflect fully, was Letters from Zettelhem. And some of this has to do with words themselves that don't come through in the movie dialogue. So he really caters the language and and what he writes about each character, the way they think, tailored to the plot itself. So Letters from Zettelhem talks about a musician. So there's a lot of stuff thrown in here that are related to music that aren't captured in the movie. Things like, what is the timbre of murder? Which is a very cool question in itself. And things like, your Mendelssohn aping Mozart, or the stakes rose like inflation in Germany. That was not music related, but I thought that was quite funny. And yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things in here, like as dear old Kilvert notes, nothing is more tiresome than being told what to admire and having things pointed at with a stick. That really resonated with me because and these are letters that he's writing, and it sounds like something that I would say. And yeah, I mean, I'm a greater fan of the book. I would say if somebody watched the movie first, don't judge the title by the movie, because it came across more confusing, and I think it was already pretty well done. It's very hard to piece together all of these different plots with different characters. I mean, the cast itself is huge, right? And they're already trying to make it easier by making Tom Hanks play that joining character between the plots. So I would say this is one of the times that the book is definitely better than the movie, although I think they've already done as much as they could with the movie itself. One quick aside, for anyone who is a fan of Cloud Atlas, I'm not sure if you have read it, but I would group it in the same category as this book, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxies. This is a trilogy in 5 parts, and they sell these in the parts themselves. But I recommend this omnibus version. I think it was cheaper, maybe $20 or so for for the entire thing. This book is more funny. It's more creative and less serious. That would be my my one sentence comparison with Cloud Atlas. Also, very, very futuristic as well. So the next book that I wanted to talk about was Identity by Francis Fukuyama. This was a hard read. I'm not used to reading about political discourse, and this, to be able to make his argument, Francis Fukuyama had to pull a lot of ideas to define things like freedom, identity itself, where resentment comes from, what does dignity mean, what does all of that represent in modern day movements and discourse. So I almost gave up after 70, 80 pages, but I wanted to see through because I couldn't see the point. The chapters are extremely short. It was only a couple of pages per chapter in the beginning, and he cycles through a lot of thinkers since antiquity. So a lot of summarizing and paraphrasing of ideas from Aristotle, Plato, Kant, and there's and later on a lot of Rousseau, a little bit of Freud, Simone Beauvoir was mentioned, a lot of Marx later on. And so it's a lot of information and a lot of ideas and thoughts. And my takeaway is that he is trying to point out an issue with modern day politics. And again, this is a book from like 2016, 2017. So another one of those books on politics that came out after Trump was elected. He is pointing out an issue or a phenomenon that he sees with modern day politics, where we are moving away from debates and traditional debates between the left and right over the distribution of economic resources, and moving more and more into identity politics, where we can see this the most, that the left is focusing on even narrower and narrower groups of marginalized people and giving them a voice and shedding that cloak of invisibility, and all of that is justified and justifiable, but the problem is that it is a fixed mindset. So something he mentions is, I can't find the page, but the idea is that when we're focusing on that inner identity itself, that is a fixed identity, and one cannot, it's either a yes or no, it's non-negotiable. Whereas as nations, we should be more moving towards focusing on a creedal culture, like creed as in a set of beliefs, going back towards the old ideas of democracy and focusing on that and reuniting our identities, aligning them to those ideas instead of smaller and smaller groups of people. Me thinking as a citizen who is for freedom of choice and all of that, versus say me as a citizen who is a minority, who is female. That's non-negotiable. So at the end, he summarized by saying we need to remember that identities dwelling deep inside us are neither fixed nor necessarily given to us by our accidents of birth. Identity can be used to divide, but it can and has also been used to integrate. That, in the end, will be the remedy for the populist politics of the present. And I think people really need to read that and hear that. And it's good that he saved it at the very end to unite all of these arguments and discussions. But it was hard to see in the beginning, and that was just a personal view, because there were so many ideas. He talks about radical Islamicism. He talks about immigration and the need for better integration versus the actual issue of immigration itself. He talks about feminism, he talks about Black Lives Matter, the Arab Springs movement. He covers a lot of ground in this book. He mentions nationalism and religion as the former variations of the fixed identity that we see today, which are even more narrow, and those have been used during times where societies were changing, when people were moving from perhaps different parts of the country, more maybe rural parts, into urban parts, or when globalization started happening. Religion and nationalism became the ways that people identified themselves. But in today's world, it's becoming even more divisive from there even downwards. So one quote that struck out, that I think really needs to be said, and I think Americans would be proud of. I need to think in similar lines a bit more. He says, in the United States, and he's quoting the political scientist Seymour Martin Lipset, in the United States, one can be accused of being un-American in a way that one could not be said to be un-Danish or un-Japanese. Americanism constituted a set of beliefs and a way of life, not an ethnicity. One can deviate from the former, but not the latter. So again, he's reinforcing through the words of Lipset this idea of a fixed identity versus one that is aligned to beliefs, which is what Americanism was built on. And that to be the way forward, as I'm assuming that he is a liberal American, he's suggesting where things might have broken down, and how to align people. And this is not just on the left, but perhaps the left and right, to promote collective action that actually solves problems and fixes things. So that's everything I wanted to talk about today. I am on to other new reading adventures, and I hope you are as well. And leave me a comment if you have any other recommendations or thoughts about the things that I've discussed.